Hello, Sarah Sabin here, executive and team coach in the Leading in the Modern Way video interview series. And I am very excited to have with me here today Tamara Littleton, who is the founder and CEO of the Social Element Agency and the co-founder of Polpeo. Tamara, welcome to the show, and could you briefly introduce yourself to my listeners?
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me on the podcast. So yes, the Social Elements, just to give a bit more of a flavor, that's a global social media marketing agency that I actually started 21 years ago. And so we do social media for huge brands. And then Polpeo is the crisis simulation company that I co-founded around about 11 years ago, which is, we basically simulate a crisis so that brands can actually prepare for like a reputational issue. And we have our own version of, sort of social media, and they have to get press releases out and that kind of thing. So that's more of a sort of a tech and services company.
Wow, that's really interesting. So, I mean, the one element here is you've been in business a long time, and I always like to talk to entrepreneurs, that can really show that sustainable growth over a period of time. But the second thing is setting up Polpeo specifically for crisis simulation. Did you set that up because you saw a need for it?
Totally. So when I set it up, so with my co-founder, amazing woman called Kate Hartley, so we were sharing an office together, and she comes from like more of a PR crisis background, and I'm more from the sort of social media marketing side. And she was actually doing our PR at the time. And we came up with the idea together because brands were getting it so wrong. So there were some brands that they would be attacked on social and they might take days to actually respond. The crisis has blown up on what was at the time Twitter, now X. And we were just sort of saying, well, the reason that people get it wrong is that the only time you learn how to deal with a crisis is by going through one. And wouldn't it be amazing if companies could actually rehearse a crisis? And we said, well, let's do it. Let's create it. And so, yeah, we built a new company before that was even a thing. So there weren't any competitors at the time. So, but there are competitors now. So it's a more mature market. But yeah, we saw the need, we went for it.
Yeah. And, that's a theme that comes up a lot. Following the trail of breadcrumbs and going where the opportunities are when you see them, which often is before competitors have sort of jumped in.
Absolutely. And I think setting up the Social Element 21 years ago, that was way ahead of its time, because actually social media didn't really exist as that kind of concept we're talking about. So I set it up in 2002. So that is before Facebook existed, Twitter, now X, and even YouTube had not actually been invented by then as well. So it was much more around forums and virtual worlds and community. So I sort of set it up around that, and then had to pivot when social media marketing became and advertising became much more of a bigger thing. So I just sort of adapted and pivoted. And I think, yeah, that ability to sort of change direction is really important.
Very much key in something like digital marketing. Out of curiosity, how do you determine when it's time to pivot?
I think the market does tell you. So I think it's about listening to our clients. So we do sort of regular surveys, and one of the questions is, are you happy? Is kind of one of the sort of regular ones. But we do ask, what else do you need? It's kind of, you try and find out what their challenges are, and then you can adapt. So you can sort of release new services. So I think talking to clients, and also just doing, I'm obsessed with podcasts and webinars and news articles, and that's where I see it as my job as the CEO, is to think about the future and the vision, and always be what's on the horizon. How do we need to change? Because I think and we've actually changed our name. The Social Element used to be called e-moderation. So a key was actually, our name was not serving us well anymore. It was holding us back because it limited us to doing what was essentially community moderation, but actually we do so much more. So I think having the sort of the confidence to change your brand is one thing, but also I think people should be always prepared to pivot. And I saw that obviously in the pandemic, people had to pivot their businesses to stay alive, really. So yeah, I think it's something as leaders you need to be ready. What's that terrible phrase about killing your kittens or something like that? So it's
I don't know.
so you have to have the confidence to realize that sometimes you actually kill your main revenue source and go in a different direction. And I always get a sort of a bit of a thrill about it, if I'm absolutely honest. I'm slightly strange, but I love growth and change, and I'm not afraid to pivot.
And I think, for entrepreneurs, that is really important to love change, because as humans, generally, we don't like change, and that can keep us stuck. And if we stay stuck for long enough, then eventually we die. And that, goes for people, it goes for companies as well.
Yeah.
And now that the world is changing faster than ever, it's more important than ever to be comfortable with change.
Definitely.
Which actually raises a question in my mind. Were you always comfortable with change, or has it been something that you've developed over time?
Well, I think it's there's a healthy balance. So if I think about, so yes, I am comfortable with the change, and I think that is part of my personality. I always like new things. So I was always the sort of person who was getting the latest sort of phone technology. I'm a sort of very curious about different things. So quite sort of pioneering, but with a sensible balance. So for example, if I go to New York, I love trying new restaurants, but I'll always go to one that I've been to before as a sort of like balance to have, I don't want complete surprises. I want a little bit of balance, but I do like new. So yeah, and in many ways, you don't realize that that's like a facet of your personality until you speak to people who don't have that growth mindset, who are not comfortable with change. And then you sort of think, oh yeah, maybe I'm just a bit different.
So you've been in business now for a long time. How have your challenges evolved over that period of time that you've been in business? So if we think about challenges at the beginning versus what's keeping you up at night now.
It's a really good question. So I think the earlier challenges were probably around managing growth, because we were in a very fortunate position. So I'm focusing now on the social element as the longer company. And I've learned so much that I was able to apply to the second company, which is always useful, actually. But in the earlier days, there was a period of about 5 years where we literally doubled our revenue every year. So very rapid growth. And there was one particular project that we were working with a big games console company, and we won. It was the time that I won my first £1 million contract, which was just so the most exciting thing, to sort of go from nothing, and then you build up the revenue, but to win our first million dollar contract was amazing. But the growth that went with that, we had to hire 200 people in 3 months. And that kind of rapid growth is really difficult on the company and can impact on the culture. What's a little bit different about us, it doesn't feel so interesting anymore, but it's something that used to pique people's interest, is that I started the company remote first. So I never had an office, and that's still the case, that we're now up to over 300 people in the agency worldwide, and they all work remotely. Now, that doesn't mean they don't get to meet each other in person, but I think that model meant that when we rapidly expanded like that, we didn't have the same issues as other people. That if you were to sort of bring in 200 people over 3 months into a company, the culture would definitely change, and it would be quite overwhelming. And going back to that question about people who are not comfortable with change, that would have really sort of thrown people, because suddenly their whole world changes. But weirdly enough, I think when you're running it with a remote workforce, we were able to manage it a lot better, because it was almost, they were sort of ring fenced, and lots of people, unless you were working on that project, you didn't necessarily see them straight away. So it allowed us to sort of gently bring in 200 people, but the actual logistics of hiring that many people, recruiting that many people, and I think psychologically, the growth of the company to go from 100 people to 300 people in 3 months was quite a big deal for me. So I think those sort of things used to keep me up at night. Things like, are we going to be able to pay everybody this month? All of those things that I'm sure lots of other people can appreciate, that in the beginning, I wasn't very good on the numbers, for example. It's not my core skill. I'm good at marketing and business development and strategy and visioning, what the company should be, but I'm terrible at the numbers. But and I was quite good at bringing in other people, but I think it was just that I didn't know what I didn't know. So I didn't know that you should have things like really strong targets of what the profitability should be, and it was almost like a little bit of a surprise of like, oh, we made a profit, have we? It's kind of, I was so naive. So I think those sort of things, it was the fact that I used to worry and panic about everything, and then you get to a stage where you have a much stronger revenue, everything becomes easier because you have sort of money, and then you can bring in experts to do the right job. So the kind of things I lose sleep about now, it's more macro events. So what's going on in the wider world that impacts, it's been a tough year in our industry, in marketing and advertising and creative industries, because brands have been spending less this year because there's a recession looming. So that's out of my control. But it's my job to worry about what's coming up in the horizon, I suppose.
That's interesting use of the word worry. So obviously, there are challenges that are going to come along, and those look different at different stages of the business, as you've already outlined. But when you say worry, is it something that's very much present on your mind until you solve that, or do you approach challenges as, okay, here's a challenge, let's actually just sit down and think what to do about it?
Yeah, I think I need to think 3 years ahead rather than what's happening next month. So I've sort of divided my attention that, I'm now in a privileged position where I have like an entire exec team. And so and we have the American team and the Europe team. So I have people who are running the day-to-day operations of the business. I don't have to get too involved in that, but it's my job to worry about the future of the company by being aware of when do we need to pivot, what do we need to do. So, during the pandemic, it was quite a weirdly exciting time, because we had to look at what are we doing and how do we change what we're doing to sort of make sure that we thrive through this pandemic. But it's also about just being constantly aware of what else should we be selling, what makes us different, how do we sort of make an impact. So yeah, I think it is about, I've just sort of trained myself to be thinking 3 years in the future, and going back to what we were saying, not be afraid to drop things or change things, or we partner with different people. And yeah, it's kind of just how can we be better. I think I'm slightly obsessed with how to be the best that we can possibly be. And when I started the company, when I started the Social Element, I wanted it to be a global agency. It wasn't good enough for me to just sort of, oh, I'll just start as a consultant and see where this goes. In my mind, I could envisage a large global agency that had lots of people in it, because I'd worked in corporates before. So I was like, I'm going to build a huge corporate. And so I think there are some things that are just inbuilt that means that I behave in maybe slightly a corporate way. And funnily enough, I remember actually dividing up all of the jobs that I needed in my company. It just so happened I was doing most of them, but at least I had a structure. Because at least you then think, okay, well, how do I fill those gaps? And that's, you then sort of set on your way. You have like targets, and then you can grow rapidly. So yeah, I guess we're just wired differently.
Well, I mean, there's a few things that I'm hearing there. So number one, the importance of a vision. And why is that important? Because when you know what you want, it's much easier to build that. Whereas if you had at the beginning be more like, okay, well, see where this goes, you might not be where you are today. So being clear on that is really important. And the second point is, even though something is smaller and much more agile, it doesn't mean it can't incorporate elements of a corporate. And essentially that means structure. Structure exists for a reason. Even creativity thrives better in a structured container than it would in complete chaos.
Yes.
So in creative industries, what I've observed is getting that balance right between organized chaos and structure is important to produce the best work.
Yes, absolutely.
Tamara, how do you define strong leadership, and how do you see it impacting the growth of your company?
Well, I think because I have the exec team, I think, and because that company has been going for so much longer, I don't necessarily feel like the leader anymore. It's become much more of a team. But it is still my responsibility to set that vision, and ultimately the culture comes down to me as well. But you know, we have a chief people officer, for example, and it's her whole job is to make sure that people are motivated, because in my business, that particular one, it's all about the talent. You know, in Polpeo, it's much more about the experience and the software and the services that we're doing. The social element, we are selling people's time, and it's all down to them. So yeah, I think the collaborative style of leadership works very well for me in both companies, but I think it's also just being aware of sort of my own limitations. I wouldn't say I was particularly egotistical. So one of my key things is that if I can hire someone who is a lot better than me, get out of their way and let them be brilliant. So I think I'm aware of what I am good at, and I'm very aware of what I'm not great at, and you fill in those gaps and you bring in other people. So perhaps the sort of self-awareness, lack of ego. I used to play a lot of sport, and I was also like a goalkeeper I used to play field hockey, a goalkeeper. And so I do have this kind of feeling that I tend to sort of lead from the back. It's not the sort of like follow me, just sort of driving out the front, do as I do. It's much more behind the scenes. I think is it described as servant leadership. I think it's more around that. So yeah, and the other thing is you don't really sort of know. I was a leader before I started the company. I'd reached a certain stage. I worked at the BBC and I worked in the company at Cello, and I was leading teams, and I've always loved leading teams. I love getting the best out of people. I love hiring people. I love the sort of, you know, you bringing new people into the dynamic and seeing what they can bring. And I'm very people focused. But as time goes on, you develop your own leadership style and perhaps become more confident. And I absorb so many books. I mean, the sort of person who goes on holiday and reads business books, but I am quite fascinated in leadership styles and people. So yeah, I'd say probably more servant leadership. And to me, it's about team collaboration.
And I think what you've said is key, because it's about finding the type of leadership that sits well with you. Even within leadership, there are different archetypes of leadership, and we tend to resonate more with certain archetypes than others. Some people are great leaders of people, some are great visionaries, some are like strategic generals. So it's understanding where you sit within that, leveraging your strengths, and then filling in the weaknesses. And, you know, filling in the weaknesses might look like bringing in experts. It might look like developing up to a certain point where it doesn't hold you back anymore. But always with that focus on, what am I really good at doing? And certainly for a CEO, it really helps to be someone that can get the best out of other people.
And it's also what brings you joy, because actually, you know, I have other people in the business who are line managing I line manage my exec team and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And that works well for me now. Whereas obviously when I'm sort of starting the business and as time went on, I was responsible for everybody and knew their strengths and weaknesses. And honestly, with 300 people, you can't know everyone individually in that same way anymore. But I have massive trust of my team and the different sort of leaders and managers in the agency to sort of let them get on with that. So yeah, I think you have to adapt, but just going back to, it has to fill me with joy, because I don't want to be doing things I don't want to do. Life's too short. So it's about things I'm good at, but things that actually motivate me too. And there are some things that when you find that sort of sweet spot of what you're good at and you happen to just love it, then it doesn't, that's why I'm still very happy, running the two companies, and that one of them has been going for so long, and I still wake up every morning and I'm still very motivated, and it's because I do stuff that I really like doing.
And I call that the zone of genius. So doing things you're really good at and that you love doing. And I think it can be easy for entrepreneurial leaders to get lost within that, to end up doing things they don't really like doing a lot of the time. And then you've essentially built a gilded cage for yourself.
Yeah. I'm thankfully very free of a gilded cage.
Good to know. And in terms of your development, you talked a little bit about reading a lot and reading business books on holiday. What steps do you take to grow and evolve as a leader?
I do love a consultant. We've had many consultants over time, so I think that's where you can learn so much. So I'm a big fan of getting the experts in. So for example, when I was growing as a leader and sort of aware that I had some limitations around, for example, I'm a bit conflict averse, but that was having a bit of an impact on the style of leadership that I think, looking back, I held on to people perhaps longer than I should have done, when they hadn't got that growth mindset themselves. But I think I was just a bit worried about letting people go, and I wanted harmony, that kind of thing. But actually, it was holding my style of leadership back, and it wasn't making it great for the rest of the team as well. So in that instance, we started using something called DISC. I don't know if you're, and so we kind of went all in on everyone having their own sort of DISC styles and understanding the different personalities. And that had such a massive impact. It was a real game changer and allowed us to sort of have a language where we speak about the sort of different types. And we even sort of started being much more aware of our own personality, because I'm actually an ambivert. So I'm right in the middle of extrovert. I'm neither sort of extroverted or introverted. I'm right in the middle, which tends to be that there are times when I'm much more introverted, times where I'm much more extroverted, and my sort of where I get my energy is I need a bit of both, but I definitely need to go and sort of be by myself. But even the fact that we were talking about that and how that impacts on our meetings, and that some people don't want to make quick decisions, they need to sleep on things, but they were feeling that because we had a few more high Ds in the company, which are much more sort of like processed, they're very energetic and quite sort of demanding and can think quickly, whereas some people were finding that quite difficult. And then we were all just talking about it. So it's a very long-winded way of saying I trust the experts. So when we have problems that I've sort of spotted, again, in my sort of obsession about being the best that we can possibly be, I'm also obsessed about performance. So as a team, we have to be a high-performing team. How do I make that happen? It's not all down to me. Sometimes I need to sort of know when to bring in the experts to make us better. A little bit, I suppose, like my sporting days is like, how do you get the best out of a team on the pitch? And it's about coaching and advice and borrowing from other people, seeing, if there are competitors who are winning awards all the time, what are they doing that's so different? How do we be that? So it's a ruthless obsession.
And a wonderful one as well. And I think it ties in a lot with sport. There's a reason why the top athletes in the world all have coaches. It's not because they need them or they'd be completely inadequate without them. It's about getting to the next level. And, you know, you mentioned the word obsession, I think out of healthy obsession, I will say,
I hope so.
can come, you know, really great things, because, you know, sometimes it's about going into a company and fixing dysfunction, but sometimes it's just about how can we go from good to great, or great to excellent, or excellent to, let's think of a word about that, absolutely splendid, marvelous.
Fabulous.
Yeah, whatever it happens to be.
And actually, you said the phrase "good to great." That is one of the books that I really value. Jim Collins, who
Jim
wrote "Good to
Collins.
Great,"
Yes.
and has the notion of the flywheel. Now, those kind of things, you know, I look back. Sometimes it is about incremental changes. You make a small change here, and bringing in a flywheel for us was a really. It felt like it felt exciting, and in many ways, you know, is this going to help? But then, as soon as you start talking about it and using a flywheel, and the kind of concept is to make it as simple as possible, and ours is ridiculously simple. It is all about bringing in the best talent, creating the best work, which leads to getting awards, which leads to more press and visibility, leads to more clients. And then we put all of the, you know, put the profits back into bringing in more talent. So it's very straightforward, it's very simple, and that's the genius. But it just meant that everyone was focused. And then you look back, and I think when we brought that in, you know, I think the following year we had like our best ever year. So you sort of, I think part of it is sometimes it's about making small changes, but it's important to look back and recognize where you've done the right strategy at the right time. And for me, I will be able to link it to certain people that I brought into the agency, whether they are talented people and we started a new division, or whether they were consultants that came in and just sort of nudged us into the right direction, for example.
Yeah, I love that. Final question, Tamara. If you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to your 20-year-old self, what would that be?
I think it would be learn to be a better speaker. I think people just underestimate the importance of public speaking, and mentioning that, you know, the fact that I am a bit more ambivert and can be a bit introverted. The thought in the early days of speaking to journalists, getting up and speaking on panels, doing like keynote speeches, I was terrified. I'm still a bit terrified these days, but I'm so much more at ease with it. And now there are some things I genuinely enjoy. I love doing podcasts, for example, but I won't do a keynote speech. I think sometimes I'm just a bit too worried about it. But if I could have gone back in time, I think I would just be trying to increase my confidence in that area, and perhaps get some training earlier, because it's been, it takes time, but it's so critical. You have to be good at speaking. You have to be good at personal branding. It matters. And I think, if I'm honest, I think we probably could have been more successful faster if I'd embraced it more earlier.
Well, the sooner you start, the better, but better late than never. And also, you've had amazing growth even without that.
Yes.
So you're doing okay.
It's never good enough. That's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. It's always the next level. Tamara, thank you so much for this conversation today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And to my listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as well. If you would like to take part in the Leading in the Modern Way series, do reach out to me. Bye for now.